one of the fundamental mistakes that we do, and I say we because I haven't met anybody in my life that has not been doing this mistake, is that when we recognize that we are judging, we try to get rid of that judgment if we are aware. Or we in different ways. Like I don't want to do the I don't want to judge myself or things like this. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you probably might have noticed that when we take off one judgment, few more come back immediately, very fast. So don't waste any time with your judgments, because the judgments are just the mechanical manifestation, the manifestation of a mechanism. So we want to deal with the mechanism, not with the single judgments, because the single judgment can be thousands and thousands and thousands. They keep morphing, they keep changing. Sometimes you're not good enough. Sometimes you should be better. Sometimes you can go more in that direction. Sometimes that person is not loving you enough, but it could be a little bit more. So it's a mess. So don't deal with the judgments. Deal with the mechanism of judging. And so it's important that you start recognizing how the mechanism arises. Forget about the specific judgment. But notice, okay, in this moment, there is a mechanism that is active. How do I recognize it? Or because I feel a constriction, or because I feel that suddenly I want to run away, or because I feel that I'm closing down. So you notice the symptoms of the mechanism. And then you recognize that the mechanism is active. Now, if you recognize the mechanism, which is basically a software, little by little, what's going to happen is that you start noticing that actually the judgments that you have about yourself, they are very few. There are few core judgments. It's not like 1,000. There are few core judgments. And you can just deal with those core judgments instead of dealing with the thousands of judgments that arise one moment after the other, because that's a complete waste of energy. So recognizing the mechanism is really also what gives you that distance. You notice that, yes, there are all these judgments that fly around, but how is the mechanism coming up in this moment? What are my perceptions? What are my symptoms? How do I recognize it? What are my feelings? Yeah? So that you become very clear that it's just a mechanism. And in that clarity, then there is a lot of distance. You don't get so engaged. Otherwise, it's very easy to get engaged with every single mechanism. And that's a trap. And unfortunately, most people deal with the judgments, and then they get trapped all their life, and they keep us, enmeshing themselves with all this mess. So this is one of the things that I really ask you to be aware. Don't give so much juice to the specific judgments. You can make a list, you can look into it, but forget it. They are just like sparks, But where is the fire? Where is the mechanism that activates all this? So that you can become more attuned with the functioning and less with all the, fire, that comes up. So now let me tell you a story, because what I'm saying to you is not a particular intuition, Like 3,000 years ago, maybe more. In the Greek mythology existed three monsters. There were three sisters, and they were called the Gorgons. And they were half woman and half serpent, dragon, so they had scales. And one of them was called Medusa. And Medusa had the particularity, she had all snakes in her head. And the snakes represent judgments. All these snakes that come and bite you, and bite yourself and bite the others, like that, thousands of snakes. And every time that somebody would try to cut a snake, few more would come up. So there was no way. And another characteristic of Medusa was that if you would look into her eyes, you would become a stone. So this is what happens with our judge. When we get entangled with our judge, we basically freeze. We tend to go stone-like, rigid, not so alive. And then we get mesmerized by all these snakes. So one day, a young man called Perseus decides that he's going to kill the Medusa. But of course, he doesn't know how to do it. He has to go into a cave where she lives, and he knows that if he goes into the cave and he faces Medusa, he's going to get, he's going to get transformed into a stone, and that the whole thing is finished. So he goes to see a god, actually a goddess, Athena, and Athena says, Perseus, I give you my shield. And then says, you take my shield and then make sure that you really make it completely shiny and clear. And then when you go inside the cave to face the monster, bring the shield in front of you to protect yourself. And then another god, brother of Athena, Apollos, comes in and says, wait a minute, I give you my sword. So then you can actually kill Medusa. And Perseus says, fantastic. So he goes, he spends some time shining the shield and sharpening the sword. And then one day he goes into the cave and he goes with this. And as he goes in, Medusa looks into her own reflection and she becomes stone. And then Perseus with the sword chops her head. Not the snakes, the head. Now, this is a representation of how we use our awareness. Our awareness has two qualities. Mirror-like awareness, the shield. I simply notice, oh, this is my superego. And the sharpness of the sword of my presence, and I chop the head. So this myth already more than 3,000 years ago was talking about what we are doing here. We are using our capacity to see ourselves and the superego in action because we have mirror-like awareness. And at the same time, we have our sword, which is called discriminating awareness, the capacity to be precise in what is my intent. And my intent is to chop its head. We want to use our clarity and see, okay, I'm under attack. This is my superego. And then don't try to change the judgments. Chop the fucking head. So that means fuck off and come back to this moment. This is the chopping of the head. You don't engage and you come back to yourself, to your presence, to what you feel, to the sense of your being in your body, to the sense of being alive in this moment. That's the practice.